He promised never to allow himself to love again, after the mistake that almost destroyed his life. But when he opened the bedroom door, he found an innocent woman stripped of defenses, marked by something he did not understand. If you like love and romance stories, watch until the end, subscribe to this channel, and leave your comment saying where you're listening from. Morning arrived slowly at Richard Harrington's mansion, as if even the sun hesitated to penetrate those perpetually closed windows. The property stood imposingly at the top of the hill in Oakwood Hills, its grey stone walls witnessing decades of silence and solitude. 11 years had passed since death had taken Elizabeth, his wife, leaving him alone in that mansion that once housed laughter and conversations. Now, only echoes inhabited the wide corridors and empty rooms. Richard observed the fine rain that had persisted for 3 consecutive days, creating a translucent curtain between him and the outside world. At 52, his face bore the marks of someone who had learned to live without expecting anything from life beyond work. His companies prospered, his businesses multiplied, but inside that house, he was just a man who had forgotten how to smile. From his office on the 2nd floor, he could hear the careful steps of the new employee the agency had sent, Sophia, a simple name for a presence that, since the first day, had brought something indefinable to those dead environments. She had arrived 2 weeks ago, recommended by Discreet Domestic Services, a company that served affluent families in New York who valued absolute privacy. His first impression of the young woman was of an almost spectral person. Thin, of medium height, brown hair always tied in a low bun, and dark clothes that made her look like a walking shadow. Her eyes were of a peculiar greyish-green that never fixed directly on his when they talked about household tasks. She spoke little, only what was necessary, with a soft voice that seemed to carry an invisible weight. But there was something more, something that Richard couldn't name and that deeply disturbed him. The way she handled the house objects, especially the older pieces, as if each one awakened a distant memory in her. How she folded the sheets with almost ritualistic precision. How she stopped in front of portraits covered by cloths and stayed there for seconds longer than would be natural for someone who was simply cleaning. Sophia seemed to know the house better than she should. On the 3rd day of work, when Richard came down for breakfast, he found her standing in front of the door of Elizabeth's old sewing room, a room that had remained locked for years. She held the doorknob with a strange delicacy, as if afraid of breaking it, but at the same time as if she knew exactly what was on the other side. When she noticed his presence, Sophia quickly released the doorknob and mumbled an excuse about just checking if all the doors were properly closed. But Richard saw something in her eyes at that moment. It wasn't curiosity, it was recognition. The house routine had subtly changed with her arrival. Richard, who used to spend entire days without speaking to anyone except for business calls, found himself creating pretexts to circulate through the rooms where she worked. He told himself it was just to supervise, to ensure everything was being done properly, but the truth was that Sophia's presence had brought something he thought lost forever, the feeling that the house could once again be inhabited by something beyond melancholy. She worked with a silent efficiency that impressed him. She never moved furniture from its place, never questioned the peculiar organization that Elizabeth had left, as if she intuitively understood that each object occupied a sacred place in the emotional geography of that man. When she cleaned the library shelves, she did so with an almost reverential care, running her fingers over the spines of the books, as if reading in Braille the stories they contained. But it was in moments when she didn't know she was being observed that Sophia revealed her true nature. Richard had caught her several times standing in front of the grand piano in the main room, the same one Elizabeth used to play on Sunday afternoons. Sophia didn't play it, but stood there, with her hands resting on the closed lid, eyes closed, as if listening to a melody only she could perceive. There were also the dreams. Richard had begun to notice that Sophia woke during the early hours. From his room on the 2nd floor, he heard light steps descending the main staircase, walking through the house as if looking for something. The next morning, he always found a window slightly ajar on the ground floor, as if she needed fresh air to breathe after nightmares he dared not imagine. The rain intensified, and Richard closed the book he was pretending to read. For 3 days he had been trying to concentrate on the same page, but his thoughts insisted on returning to the young woman who had transformed his house into something different than it had been for the last 11 years. Something he still couldn't define as better or worse, but that certainly was no longer the same. He descended the stairs with heavy steps, the sound echoing through the high corridors. The house seemed larger when he walked alone through it, as if the walls expanded to accommodate all the loneliness he carried. But now there was another sound, the soft noise of cloths being folded coming from the laundry room. Sophia was there, her back to the door, organizing towels in perfect piles. She wore a simple navy blue dress that accentuated the paleness of her skin and the delicacy of her movements. Richard stopped at the threshold, watching her work, and had the strange sensation of seeing a scene from his own memory, as if she had always been there in that same position, waiting for him to find her. The trip to New York had been cancelled at the last minute. The client had changed his mind about the meeting time, and Richard had decided to return home 3 days earlier than planned. It was a Thursday afternoon. The sun filtered through the clouds, creating a play of golden lights that danced through the mansion's windows. He parked the car in the garage and entered through the back door, as he always did when he didn't want to be announced. The house was enveloped in that peculiar silence of autumn afternoons, when even the wind seems to hesitate to make noise. Richard climbed the main stairs unhurriedly, hearing only the muffled sound of his own steps on the Persian carpet, covering the steps. There was something comforting in that ritual of return, in the sensation of being back in his territory, away from tense negotiations and commitments that exhausted him. As he passed through the second-floor corridor, he noticed that the door to the old guest room was ajar. A beam of golden light escaped through the crack, projecting a luminous rectangle on the dark floor of the corridor. Richard frowned. That room had remained closed since Sophia arrived, used only to store some of her personal belongings during the work period. He approached without making noise, moved by a curiosity he himself couldn't explain. Perhaps it was just the owner's instinct, checking if everything was in order, or perhaps it was something deeper, an inexplicable need to understand the woman who had brought a strange vitality to that dead house. Through the door crack, he saw Sophia with her back to him. She was changing clothes, having just removed the navy blue uniform she wore during work. The afternoon light fell on her skin with an almost ethereal softness, revealing the delicacy of her shoulders and the elegant line of her spine. There was nothing vulgar in that vision. It was like contemplating an ancient sculpture, something pure and untouched by time. Sophia moved with a natural grace, unhurriedly, as if that were a sacred moment of transition between who she was during work and who she really was when no one was watching her. Richard felt something break inside him, a barrier he had built so carefully over 11 years of self-imposed solitude. It was then that she turned slightly, and their eyes met through the crack in the door. There was no scream, no sudden movement to cover herself. Sophia simply looked at him, and in that gaze was a serenity that completely disarmed him. It was as if she knew he was there, as if she had been waiting for that moment. Richard gently pushed the door, which opened without noise. He entered the room with slow, almost ceremonious steps. Sophia pulled a nightgown to cover her body, but didn't move away, didn't show fear or embarrassment. They stood there, separated by only a few meters, but united by something neither could name. Time seemed suspended. The golden light continued to dance on the walls, creating shadows that moved like benevolent ghosts. Richard felt his heart beat with an intensity he hadn't experienced in years, as if all the blood in his body had been awakened from a deep sleep. It was then that the words left his mouth, almost without his permission. "May I touch your skin?" His voice came out hoarse, laden with a vulnerability he didn't recognize in himself. It wasn't carnal desire. It was something more primitive, more desperate. It was the plea of a man who had forgotten what human contact meant, who had lived so long among shadows that he doubted his own ability to touch something without destroying it. Sophia didn't respond immediately. She stood there looking at him with those green eyes that seemed to carry ancient secrets. Slowly, she let the nightgown slip slightly off her shoulders, in a gesture that wasn't seduction, but surrender. Trust, as if she understood that this wasn't a predatory advance, but the desperate request of someone who needed to relearn what it was to be alive. Richard took a step forward, then another. The breathing of both became slower, deeper. When he was just a meter away, he extended his right hand, hesitating in the air between them. Sophia looked at that hand, as if she saw in it the entire history of pain and isolation it carried, all the repressed need for human connection. She didn't say yes, but she also didn't say no. She simply closed her eyes and slightly inclined her face toward his hand, in a gesture of silent permission that was more eloquent than any word could have been. Richard's fingers touched her face with the delicacy of someone touching something sacred. Sophia's skin was warm, soft, real. So different from the memories he had cultivated over years, from the vague fantasies that populated his lonely nights. It was tangible proof that life still existed beyond the walls he had built around his heart. Sophia slowly opened her eyes, and in them was a deep sadness, as if she too carried her own wounds, her own ghosts. For an infinite moment, they remained like this, connected by that simple but revolutionary touch, two human beings mutually recognizing each other through the skin. It was Sophia who broke the silence, with a voice even softer than usual. "How long has it been since you touched anyone?" The question was direct but without cruelty. There was a genuine curiosity in it, as if she instinctively understood the magnitude of that moment for him. Richard slowly withdrew his hand, as if wanting to memorize that sensation. 11 years, he replied, his voice almost a whisper. Since Elizabeth died, I couldn't anymore. He didn't know why he was confessing that to a stranger, why he felt compelled to reveal to her the extent of his loneliness. Sophia nodded, as if she understood perfectly. "I don't remember the last time someone touched me without wanting something in return," she said, and in those words was a pain that echoed his. Maybe that's why I wasn't scared. I recognized the hunger. The word hung between them, like a mutual confession. Hunger. That was exactly what they both carried, a hunger for genuine human contact, for connection that transcended basic needs and reached something deeper, more true. The days that followed the encounter in the room transformed the dynamics of the mansion in a subtle but undeniable way. It was as if the house itself had awakened from a deep sleep, reacting to the new energy circulating through its corridors. Richard noticed it first in small things. The way morning light seemed more intense as it crossed the windows, the sound of his steps echoing differently in the empty rooms, the feeling that someone finally inhabited those spaces besides him. Sophia continued her tasks with the same silent efficiency as always, but something had changed in the way she moved through the house. There was a new awareness in her gestures, as if she knew she was being watched, but without the discomfort that would normally cause. It was mutual observation, laden with curiosity and expectation. Richard found himself creating reasons to be in the same environments as her. He decided to work in the library during the mornings, precisely when Sophia cleaned the antique furniture. He settled into the leather armchair near the window, pretending to read reports, but actually observing her movements between the tall shelves. There was an almost dance-like ritual in the way she worked. She took each book, wiped it with reverential care, then replaced it in the exact spot. Sometimes she stopped to read a title, slightly furrowing her brow as if that name awakened some distant memory. When this happened, Richard felt an almost physical curiosity to know what thoughts were passing through her mind. It was during one of these mornings that he saw her stop in front of the classical literature section, holding a copy of The Scarlet Letter with slightly trembling hands. Sophia opened the book to a specific page, as if she knew exactly what she was looking for, and read something that made her eyes fill with tears that she quickly wiped away. "You know this book?" asked Richard, breaking the morning silence. Sophia, startled slightly as if she had forgotten his presence. "Yes, sir. Someone used to read to me when I was a child." Her voice carried a deep nostalgia, mixed with pain. "This passage about the weight of hidden sin always struck me. Who read to you?" For a moment she hesitated, as if deciding how much she could reveal. A very kind woman. She said I had a special understanding for words, that I could see beyond what was written. Sophia carefully closed the book and replaced it on the shelf. But that was a long time ago in another place. Richard felt there was much more behind those words, but he didn't insist. He was learning that Sophia revealed herself in layers, like an onion that needs to be peeled with infinite patience. The afternoons became the most tense moment of the day. It was when Sophia finished the heavy work and dedicated herself to details, arranging the fresh flowers that Richard had begun to buy without explanation, adjusting decorative objects, checking if everything was in perfect order. And it was. Also when he used to circulate through the house, checking documents, taking calls, creating pretexts to be near her. A complex, non-verbal language developed between them. Glances sustained for seconds longer than would be appropriate, significant pauses when they crossed in the corridors. The way Sophia always left a cup of fresh coffee on his office desk, without ever mentioning the gesture. How Richard began to leave books open to specific pages, knowing she would see them and understand the subliminal messages contained in the marked passages. There were also moments of near touch, when he extended documents for her to sign receipts, allowing their fingers to meet for a fraction of a second. When she adjusted the curtains in the living room and he approached to help, creating a physical proximity that made the air between them vibrate with tension. These were calculated encounters, but which seemed casual, an elaborate dance around the desire that neither dared to completely name. The house responded to this new energy in almost mystical ways. The clock in the main hall, stopped for 11, years at the exact moment of Elizabeth's death, began to make sporadic noises, as if trying to come back to life. The plants that Sophia had insisted on watering, even though they appeared dead, began to sprout new leaves. Even the piano in the main room seemed different, less dusty, as if waiting for someone to finally play it. It was on one of these tension-laden afternoons that Richard decided to break one of the rules he had imposed on himself since Elizabeth's death. He went up to the attic of the house, a space that had remained untouched since then, where he kept his wife's most personal things. He was looking for something specific, although he didn't know exactly what. Among dusty boxes and furniture, covered by sheets, he found Elizabeth's old writing desk, where she used to write her letters and organize the house correspondence. In the lower drawers, he discovered a collection of notebooks he had never seen before, all with the delicate handwriting of his late wife. He sat right there, on the dusty attic floor, and began to leaf through the diaries. Most of the entries were from the final period of Elizabeth's life, when illness was already slowly consuming her. But there were older entries from decades ago that spoke of issues he thought forgotten forever. One entry in particular froze him. Richard still doesn't know about the child. I don't know if I'll ever have the courage to tell him. What we did to that poor woman was unforgivable, but I couldn't live with the living proof of his betrayal right under my roof. The girl is safe in the sisters' orphanage, far from us, far from this house that we've stained with our mistakes. Richard reread the passage 3 times before he could fully process what was written. A child. Elizabeth knew about a child he apparently was unaware of, and she had mentioned an orphanage, a girl who had been removed from the family by her decision. With trembling hands, he continued looking for more information in the diaries. He found sparse references to Rebecca and her daughter, to painful but necessary decisions, to secrets I'll take to the grave. But the most disturbing of all was an entry dated a few months before Elizabeth's death. I dream of that girl every night. She must be about 20 years old now. Sometimes I imagine what her life would be like if I had made different choices. If I had been stronger, more generous, but it's too late for regrets. 20 years. If the calculations were correct, that child mentioned in Elizabeth's diaries would today be approximately 23 years old, the same age as Sophia. The discovery of the diaries left Richard in a state of shock for days. He kept the notebooks in the safe in his office, but Elizabeth's words echoed in his mind like a disturbing mantra. A child. A girl she had sent to an orphanage, a daughter he possibly never knew existed. During the nights that followed, Richard stayed awake, trying to reconstruct fragments of the past. He vaguely remembered Rebecca, a young woman who had worked briefly as a secretary in his offices in downtown New York more than 2 decades ago. She was beautiful, intelligent, and there was an attraction between them that he had tried to ignore, but that eventually was consummated in a series of clandestine encounters that lasted a few months. When Rebecca suddenly disappeared from work, Richard assumed she had found a better job or decided to change her life. Elizabeth never mentioned knowing her, never showed jealousy or suspicions. For years he believed his extramarital affair had remained in absolute secrecy. But now, reading his wife's diaries, he understood that Elizabeth not only knew everything, but had taken drastic measures to protect the marriage. What tormented him most was the terrible possibility that Sophia could be the daughter Rebecca had given birth to, and that Elizabeth had torn from her mother to place in an orphanage. The coincidence of age was too disturbing to be ignored. 23 years old. Sophia's strange behavior in the house, as if she recognized places and objects. The inexplicable familiarity with certain rooms. The way she sometimes stopped in front of covered photographs with an air of painful recognition. Richard began to observe Sophia with new eyes, looking for physical similarities that could confirm or dismiss his suspicions. Her green eyes weren't like Rebecca's, who had brown eyes, but there was something in the line of her jaw, in the delicate shape of her hands, that awakened diffuse memories. Even more disturbing was the way Sophia moved through the house. One morning, Richard discreetly followed her as she cleaned the second floor. He saw her stop in front of Elizabeth's old sewing room door and try the doorknob, as if expecting to find it unlocked. When she realized the door was closed, she rested her forehead against the wood for a few seconds, in a gesture that seemed to carry years of longing. "Sophia," Richard called, startling her, "have you been in this house before?" The question came out more direct than he intended. Sophia turned slowly, and in her eyes was genuine confusion, as if she herself didn't know the answer. "No, sir. At least, not that I remember." She hesitated, nervously running her hands over her apron. "But sometimes I feel as if I've walked these corridors before. It's strange, I know. And do you remember your childhood? How you came to the orphanage?" Sophia visibly stiffened. It was the first time Richard mentioned knowing details about her past, and she clearly didn't expect that revelation. "How? Do you know about the orphanage?" Her voice came out colder, defensive. "Intuition," Richard lied. "You have the behavior of someone who grew up in an institution, the way you organize things, how you quickly adapt to spaces. It's an observation, not a judgment." Sophia studied him for a long moment, as if trying to decide how much she could trust him. "I don't remember almost anything from before I was 6. The nuns said I arrived very traumatized, that my mind blocked the memories to protect itself." She unconsciously touched a small scar she had on her left wrist. "Only fragments remain. Confused dreams about a big house, about a woman who smelled of roses and read stories to me." Richard's heart accelerated. Elizabeth always wore rose perfume. It was her trademark, something that permeated all the rooms of the house when she was alive. "And you never tried to find out about your real family?" "What for?" Sophia's response was bitter. "The nuns made it very clear that I had been abandoned, that my family didn't want me. For years I made up stories about parents who would come back for me. But eventually I learned that some abandonments are definitive." The pain in her voice was like a punch to Richard's stomach. If his suspicions were correct, Sophia hadn't been abandoned by her mother's choice, but forcibly taken by Elizabeth, and he, unconsciously, would be responsible for all that pain. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He stayed in the library, leafing through old photo albums, looking for any image of Rebecca that might have survived the years. He found some photos from the time she worked in his office, at company events where she appeared in the background. In one of the photos, Rebecca was in profile, smiling at someone outside the frame. The resemblance to Sophia was subtle, but undeniable. The same curve of the neck, the same delicate way of tilting her head. It wasn't conclusive proof, but it was enough to fuel his suspicions. It was then that he heard steps coming down the stairs. Sophia had again awakened during the early hours and was walking through the house. Richard quickly put away the photographs and left the library, finding her in the main room in front of the grand piano. She was in a white nightgown, her hair loose falling over her shoulders, her feet bare on the Persian rug. There was something ethereal about her appearance, as if she were a ghost revisiting lost memories. "You can't sleep?" asked Richard in a low voice, so as not to startle her. Sophia turned slowly, showing no surprise at seeing him there. "I have strange dreams in this house. I dream that someone plays the piano, a melody that seems familiar, but that I can't identify when I wake up." Richard approached the piano and lifted the lid, revealing the keys yellowed by time. Elizabeth used to play every afternoon. Chopin was her favorite composer. Without thinking, he pressed some keys, reproducing the first measures of Nocturne Op. 9 No. 2, the piece Elizabeth loved most. The sound filled the room with a sweet melancholy that seemed to awaken all the ghosts of the house. Sophia closed her eyes and for a moment seemed a child again, lost in memories her conscious mind couldn't access. A solitary tear ran down her face. "I know this music," she whispered. "I don't know how, but I know every note." Sophia's reaction to the sound of the piano confirmed Richard's worst fears. During the following days, he became a shadow of himself, deliberately avoiding her, creating excuses to work away from home, to not have to face the terrifying possibility of falling in love with his own daughter. The change in behavior didn't go unnoticed by Sophia. She noticed how he averted his gaze when they crossed in the corridors, how his responses became monosyllabic and formal. The delicate intimacy they had built over weeks seemed to have evaporated overnight, leaving her confused and hurt. It was on a Friday morning that Sophia decided to confront him. Richard was in the office, pretending to study financial reports, when she knocked on the door with a determination she didn't usually show. "Mr. Harrington, we need to talk." Richard looked up from the documents, feeling his stomach contract. Sophia was standing before him with a different posture, firmer, as if she had made an important decision during the night. "If I did something wrong, I prefer that you tell me directly. I can't work in this atmosphere of tension." "You didn't do anything wrong," replied Richard, avoiding looking directly at her. "I'm just going through a difficult period. Personal issues." "Personal issues that involve the way you've been looking at me lately?" As if I were a threat or a ghost. Her keen perception surprised him. Sophia was more observant than he had imagined, capable of reading the nuances of his behavior with a disconcerting precision. "Sophia, there are things about this house, about the past, that are very complicated to explain." "Then explain." She took a step forward, crossing her arms. "Since I arrived here, I feel like I'm living inside a puzzle where all the pieces fit, but I can't see the complete picture. And you know something about this, don't you?" Richard closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the decision he needed to make. He could lie, create some excuse, send Sophia away and try to forget this whole disturbing situation, or he could face the truth, however painful it might be. "You said you don't remember anything before you were 6. "Yes. And if I told you that maybe you've already lived in this house, that maybe your real mother worked for me more than 20 years ago?" Sophia visibly paled. "What are you saying?" Richard opened the safe and removed Elizabeth's diaries, placing them on the desk with trembling hands. "My wife left some writings. In them she mentions a child who was removed from this house when she was very young." Sophia approached the desk slowly, as if afraid the diaries would explode if she moved too quickly. "A child?" "A girl, daughter of a woman named Rebecca." Richard carefully observed Sophia's reaction to the name. "Have you heard this name before?" Sophia's face contorted in an expression of painful concentration, as if she were trying to access blocked memories. "Rebecca. Sometimes in my dreams, someone calls me Little Angel, and when I ask who it is, a voice answers, 'It's Mommy Rebecca.'" Richard's heart stopped for a second. Little Angel. He vaguely remembered Rebecca using this affectionate expression when talking about her young daughter. "Sophia, I need you to be very strong to hear what I'm going to tell you." She nodded, but Richard could see the fear growing in her eyes. "I had a relationship with Rebecca more than 20 years ago. She worked for me and we got involved. When she got pregnant, she disappeared from work. I never knew she had had the child. And you think Elizabeth found out about the affair. According to her diaries, she found Rebecca, took the child and put her in an orphanage to protect our marriage. Sophia staggered, leaning on the nearest chair. The color had completely drained from her face. You're saying I might be your daughter? It's a possibility I can't ignore. The silence that settled in the office was deafening. Sophia remained motionless for long minutes, processing the devastating information. When she finally spoke, her voice came out strangled. That's why you pulled away. That's why you avoid. Because you think that we... She couldn't finish the sentence. Sophia, I need to be sure before what? She raised her voice for the first time since they started talking. Before continuing to feel attracted to me. Because that's what's happening, isn't it? And now you're terrified by the possibility of desiring your own daughter. The brutal honesty of Sophia's words hit Richard like a slap. She had verbalized exactly what he couldn't admit even to himself. Yes, he answered in an almost inaudible voice, I'm terrified. Sophia began to pace back and forth in the office, her hands visibly trembling. I always knew there was something different about this house, the way certain objects affect me, how some music makes me cry for no reason, but I never imagined... She stopped abruptly. How can we discover the truth? DNA test, Richard immediately replied. It's the only way to be absolutely sure. And while we wait for the result, we keep our distance. I can arrange for you to work at another property or... No, Sophia's response was firm. I'm not going to run away. If you are indeed my father, then I've spent 23 years without knowing who I really am. I want to stay here. I want to understand this house, these memories that haunt me. Sophia, you don't understand how dangerous this can be. Dangerous for whom? For you, who has to confront the consequences of your choices, or for me, who can finally discover where I came from? Richard remained silent, impressed by the sudden strength Sophia demonstrated. It was as if the possibility of discovering her origins had transformed her into a different person, more determined, braver. There's one more thing, said Sophia after a moment. I found something yesterday when I was cleaning your room. She extended a small golden music box, delicately crafted. When she opened it, a familiar melody began to play. The same Chopin nocturne that Elizabeth used to play on the piano. It was hidden behind a loose drawer. Inside was this. Sophia showed a folded paper yellowed by time. Richard took the letter with trembling hands. The handwriting was unknown, but the signature made him freeze. With eternal love, Rebecca. The letter was addressed to Sophia M. and said, My angel, if you're reading this, it means you found your way back home. Yes, home. Because that mansion was your first home, where you took your first steps, spoke your first words. Richard is not your biological father, but he was the one who first made you laugh, who carried you around the house on Sunday afternoons while I prepared dinner. Elizabeth may have destroyed our family, but she cannot erase the love we built during your first months of life. You belong to that place, Sophia, more than any of them, and if one day you decide to forgive the mistakes of the past, know that love also lived in that house. The love between us, the affection Richard felt for you, even the sick love Elizabeth felt for him. Distorted love, misdirected love, but love nonetheless. Don't let pain be the only inheritance you take from this story. You deserve to be happy, my angel. You've always deserved to be happy. Rebecca's letter changed everything. Sophia spent the following days on an emotional roller coaster, alternating between moments of hope and deep despair. She finally had concrete proof that her biological mother loved her, that she hadn't been abandoned by choice. But this discovery also brought to light an even more terrifying question. Who was her father? Richard, for his part, plunged into an obsessive investigation. He hired a private detective to track down information about Rebecca, but records from the 2000s were scarce. What he managed to discover only intensified his anguish. Rebecca had died in 2010, at 42, a victim of cancer, without ever having managed to find her daughter. It was during this frantic search for answers that Dr. Mitchell appeared at the mansion. Edward Mitchell had been the family doctor for more than 30 years, a discreet and observant man who knew all the secrets of the affluent families of Oakwood Hills. He had been retired for 5 years, but maintained sporadic contact with Richard. "I came as soon as I heard you were digging into the past," said the doctor, as he settled in the library with a glass of whiskey. He was 72, with completely white hair and shrewd eyes that seemed to see through lies. "I don't know what you're talking about," Richard lied. "Richard, I accompanied Elizabeth throughout her illness. In the last months, she talked a lot about regrets, about decisions that tormented her." Dr. Mitchell took a sip of whiskey and looked at his friend seriously. "She mentioned a child, a girl you took from her biological mother." Richard's heart accelerated. "What exactly did Elizabeth tell you?" "That you committed a terrible injustice, that an innocent young woman paid the price for your marital errors." The doctor made a dramatic pause, "and that the girl would probably grow up never knowing the truth about her origins. And you knew who the father was." Dr. Mitchell laughed bitterly. "Richard, I was Rebecca's doctor too. I was the one who followed her pregnancy, who delivered the baby, and I can guarantee you one thing. You are not the father of that child." The silence that followed was absolute. Richard felt as if the floor had disappeared from under his feet. "What do you mean?" "Rebecca sought my services when she discovered she was pregnant. She was desperate, said she had been involved with a married man who would never assume paternity. She asked me for absolute secrecy." Dr. Mitchell leaned forward. "But she never mentioned your name." "Richard. And when I did the calculations of the months of gestation, I realized that conception had happened at a time when you were traveling to Europe for 2 consecutive months." Richard tried to process the information. "Then who?" "Walter." "Freeman, your business partner at the time?" The name dropped like a bomb. Walter had been his business partner for more than a decade, a married man, family father, respected in society. He had died 5 years ago from a massive heart attack. "Walter, but how did Elizabeth?" "Elizabeth discovered the affair between you and Rebecca through letters she found in your office. She assumed you were the father of the child and, moved by jealousy and anger, decided to resolve the situation." Dr. Mitchell sighed heavily. "When she confronted Rebecca, the poor young woman tried to explain that you weren't the father, but Elizabeth wouldn't listen. She was blind with pain and vengeance. And you never told me this." "Rebecca made me swear secrecy. And afterward, when everything happened, I thought it would be better to leave the past buried. I didn't imagine the girl would return to haunt this house." Richard rose abruptly, walking to the window. His mind was in turmoil. Sophia was not his daughter. The relief he felt was immediately replaced by an even greater guilt. If he hadn't betrayed Elizabeth, if he hadn't become involved with Rebecca, none of this would have happened. "Where is the girl now?" asked Dr. Mitchell. "Here. She works for me." The doctor almost dropped his whiskey glass. "What do you mean here?" "Sophia. She was hired by an agency to work as a housekeeper. We had no idea who she was until—" "My God, Richard, you think it's a coincidence, What do you mean?" "A young woman who spent her entire life looking for her origins, who grew up in an orphanage, getting a job precisely in the house where she lived as a baby? That's not chance. She came looking for answers." At that moment, Sophia appeared at the library door, carrying a tray with fresh coffee. She stopped abruptly upon seeing the visitor, and Dr. Mitchell visibly paled upon seeing. "Thrice my God," murmured the doctor. "She looks just like Rebecca at that age." Sophia left the tray on a side table and looked alternately at the 2 men. "You were talking about me." It wasn't a question, but a statement. Dr. Mitchell rose slowly, studying the young woman's face. "With the attention of someone who encounters a ghost, you're Sophia, aren't you? Rebecca Morales' daughter." Sophia nodded, feeling her legs weaken. "You knew my mother?" "I was her doctor during her pregnancy. I followed you until the first months of life." Dr. Mitchell's voice was laden with emotion. "You were a beautiful baby, very smart. Rebecca said you had old soul eyes. that you seem to understand everything around you. And my father. Do you know my father? Dr. Mitchell exchanged a tense look with Richard. I knew him. Walter Freeman died a few years ago. He was a complex man, neither good nor bad. Just human. Sophia absorbed the information in silence for a few moments. So Mr. Harrington isn't... No, Richard isn't your biological father. The relief on both their faces was palpable, but Dr. Mitchell continued. But he is responsible indirectly for what happened to you and your mother. His extramarital affair with Rebecca was what led Elizabeth to discover the pregnancy and take the drastic measures she took. Sophia turned to Richard, and in her eyes was a mixture of pain, understanding, and something he couldn't immediately identify. So my mother suffered because of your choices. I grew up without a family, because of your choices, and your wife... Sophia paused, taking a deep breath. Your wife destroyed an innocent woman's life because of your mistakes. Sophia, No. She raised her hand, interrupting him. Now I understand why this house affects me so much. It's not nostalgia. It's pain. This house was built on lies and suffering, and I am one of the victims of that rotten foundation. Dr. Mitchell observed the scene with a worried expression. Sophia, maybe you should... Should what? Leave. Pretend none of this happened. She laughed bitterly. I spent 23 years of my life not knowing who I was. Now I know, and now I need to decide what to do with this truth. After Dr. Mitchell's revelation, the atmosphere of the mansion changed drastically. Sophia was no longer the discreet and invisible employee of the first days. Now she walked the corridors with a different posture, as if she finally had the right to be there, as if the house belonged to her as much as to Richard. But it was a bitter possession, built on decades of injustice and suffering. Richard, for his part, was torn between the relief of knowing Sophia wasn't his daughter and the crushing weight of guilt. His past actions had destroyed innocent lives, and now he had to live daily with one of the main victims of his choices. The desire he felt for her, once terrifying because of the possibility of incest, had now transformed into a torture of another nature. How could he aspire to the love of someone whose life he had helped to ruin? It was Mrs. Jenkins, the housekeeper, who had worked in the house for more than 20 years, who brought the next piece of the puzzle. Jenkins was a 60-year-old woman, thin and austere, who had always maintained a professional distance from all the masters she had served. But since Sophia's arrival, her behavior had changed in a subtle and disturbing way. Mrs. Jenkins observed the young woman with an intensity that bordered on hostility. But there was something more in that look. It was as if she knew Sophia, as if she had been waiting for her arrival for years. During meals, the housekeeper placed Sophia's plate on the table with contained violence, making unnecessary noise with the cutlery, sighing heavily whenever she had to address her. Sophia, in turn, had noticed the changes in Mrs. Jenkins's behavior, but interpreted it as the natural disapproval of an old employee for the arrival of someone new. She didn't imagine that the housekeeper's hostility had much deeper and more painful roots. It was on a Sunday afternoon, when Richard had gone out for a business meeting, that the confrontation finally happened. Sophia was in the kitchen preparing a snack when Mrs. Jenkins entered abruptly, closing the door behind her with a loud thud. "You shouldn't be here," said Mrs. Jenkins without preamble, her voice laden with anger contained for decades. Sophia turned slowly, surprised by the sudden aggressiveness. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Jenkins. If I'm bothering you in the kitchen, I'm not referring to the kitchen, girl. I'm referring to this house. You shouldn't have come back." "Come back?" Sophia felt her heart accelerate. "Do you know me?" "Mrs." Jenkins laughed bitterly, a harsh sound that echoed off the tiled walls. "No, you. I took care of you when you were a baby. I was here the day they took you from your mother. I saw that poor young woman beg, cry, drag herself across the floor of this very kitchen, pleading for them not to take her daughter." The blood drained from Sophia's face. "You were here when Mrs. Elizabeth decided you were a threat to her marriage? When she paid those men to take you from Rebecca? Yes, I was here, and I did nothing to prevent it." The confession came out like a shot, followed by a heavy silence that seemed to suck the air from the kitchen. Sophia leaned on the counter, her legs trembling. "Why didn't you do anything?" "Because I was a coward. Because I needed the job. Because Mrs. Elizabeth said it was for the good of everyone, that you would be raised by a better family, away from the sins of this house." Mrs. Jenkins began to pace back and forth, her hands tightly interlaced. "But I never forgot your mother's screams, never forgot how you cried when they tore you from her arms." Sophia slowly slid down until she was sitting on the cold kitchen floor, her back against the cupboard. Tears began to roll silently down her face. "Do you remember me?" asked Mrs. Jenkins, her voice softening for the first time. Sometimes I dream of a woman in a blue apron who gave me a bottle, who hummed a lullaby while rocking me." Sophia looked up. "Was that you?" Mrs. Jenkins nodded, her own tears beginning to well up. "I took care of you during the day while your mother worked. You were a very special baby, very attached to people. When they came to take you away, you reached out your little arms to me, as if asking for help. And you didn't help me." "No, and that has haunted me for 23 years. Sophia remained silent for long minutes, absorbing that new layer of pain. One more person who could have prevented her separation from her mother, one more person who chose cowardice. "Why are you telling me this now?" Mrs. Jenkins dried her tears with her apron and recovered her rigid posture. "Because you need to know that you can't stay here. This house is cursed by the sins of the past. Nothing good can come from your staying here." "Cursed?" Mrs. Elizabeth was never happy after that day. She became ill quickly, as if remorse was eating her from the inside. She spent the last years of her life talking to herself, asking forgiveness from people who weren't there. Mrs. Jenkins approached Sophia. "And Mr. Richard, he was never the same after his wife died. He became a shadow, a living dead man. This entire house died that day. But now I'm here. Maybe I can—" "What? Save this family? Redeem the sins of the past?" Mrs. Jenkins shook her head vigorously. "You are not a savior, Sophia. You are a victim. And if you stay here, you'll become a victim again." "What are you talking about?" Mrs. Jenkins hesitated, as if internally debating whether she should reveal yet another secret. Finally, she sighed, heavily. "I see how Mr. Richard looks at you. I see how you look at him. What you're feeling isn't love. It's a desperate attempt to transform pain into something beautiful. But some wounds are too deep to heal with kisses." Sophia rose slowly, facing the housekeeper with a new determination. "Maybe you're right about this house being cursed, but I'm no longer that helpless baby who was torn from her mother's arms. I'm an adult woman, capable of making my own choices. And what choices are those? I don't know yet, but I know I'm not going to run away again. I've been running all my life, from orphanages, from adoptive families who didn't want me, from relationships that could hurt me. This time I'm going to stay and face the truth, however painful it may be." Mrs. Jenkins studied the young woman's face for a long moment, looking for signs of weakness or doubt. She found none. "Then may God protect you," murmured the housekeeper. "Because this house has already destroyed many lives, and I fear it hasn't finished yet." That night, when Richard returned from the meeting, he found Sophia in the library reading Elizabeth's diaries. She looked up when he entered, and in her eyes was a new depth, as if she had aged years in just one afternoon. "Mrs. Jenkins told me about the day they took me from my mother," said Sophia without preamble. Richard felt his stomach turn. "Sophia, she said you weren't here that day, that you were traveling on business." "I was. Elizabeth handled everything alone. When I returned, you had already disappeared. And you never asked what had happened to Rebecca's baby." Richard lowered his eyes, unable to sustain her gaze. "I was a coward. I preferred to believe that you had simply moved to another city, that you were well somewhere far from here." Mrs. Jenkins' confession triggered something in Sophia that she couldn't control. Over the following days, she became a different person, harder, more confrontational. It was as if all the repressed pains of a lifetime had finally found a target to direct themselves at, and that target was Richard. She stopped doing the household chores with the discretion of before. Now she cleaned the furniture with abrupt movements, made unnecessary noise with objects, let doors slam shut forcefully. When Richard tried to talk to her, he received cutting responses or simply icy silence. On a Tuesday morning, Richard found Sophia in the main room pulling off the cloths that covered Elizabeth's portraits. She did this with contained violence, as if attacking the ghosts of the past through those dusty fabrics. "What are you doing?" asked Richard, alarmed. "Uncovering this house," Sophia replied without looking at him. "I'm tired of living among ghosts and secrets. If I'm going to stay here, I want to see everything. I want to know the woman who destroyed my family." She pulled off the last cloth, revealing the main portrait of Elizabeth, an oil painting made a few years before her death, where she appeared elegant and serene, with a smile that now seemed cruel to Sophia's eyes. "She was beautiful," said Sophia, studying the image. "I bet she thought she was doing the right thing, protecting her marriage, her social position. Women like her always think their pain justifies any cruelty." Sophia, Elizabeth was suffering. Discovering the betrayal left her suffering. Sophia turned to him with flaming eyes. "And my mother's suffering didn't matter. The suffering of a baby torn from its mother's arms didn't matter. Only the suffering of the rich and powerful wife had value." "That's not what I'm saying." "That's exactly what you're saying." Sophia began to walk around the room, her steps echoing in the tense silence. "You high society people think your feelings are more important than those of people like my mother, as if your pain was worth more because you have more money." Richard tried to approach, but Sophia instinctively retreated. "Don't come near me. Not now." "Sophia, I know you're angry, but—" "Angry?" She laughed, but it was a sound without humor. "Angry is little. I'm furious. I'm devastated. I'm falling in love with you, and that makes me even more furious." The confession came out like a slap. Richard stood motionless, processing the words she had just uttered. "You heard right," continued Sophia, tears finally beginning to well up. "Despite everything you did, despite your cowardice, despite being responsible for the destruction of my life, I'm falling in love with you. And I can't decide if that makes me an idiot or a masochist." "Sophia, don't say anything, please don't say anything." She let herself fall into an armchair, covering her face with her hands. "I spent my entire life looking for home, for family, for belonging. And when I finally find this place, I discover it was built on my mother's bones." Richard stood in the middle of the room, torn between the desire to console her and the certainty that his proximity would only cause more pain. "But the worst of all," continued Sophia through her tears, "is that even knowing all this, I can't leave. This cursed house, all this has become an obsession. It's as if I needed to stay here until I resolve something that I don't even know what it is." It was at that moment that Richard made a decision he had been postponing for weeks. He slowly approached Sophia, knelt before the armchair, and for the first time since the day in the room touched her again. He held her hands in his, forcing her to look at him. "Sophia, look at me." She raised her eyes, red from crying, and in them was a vulnerability that broke his heart. "I'm going to tell you everything, every detail of what happened 23 years ago. And afterward, if you want me to leave, I will. I'll leave this house to you, leave everything, and disappear from your life forever. Why would you do that? Because you're right, this house should be yours. Your mother worked here, you were born here. You have more right to this place than I do." Richard squeezed her hands. "And because I fell in love with you too, hopelessly, irremediably in love. And I can't build anything with you based on lies and secrets." Sophia studied his face for long moments, looking for signs of falsehood or manipulation. She found none. "Everything," she finally said. "I want to know everything." Richard nodded and stood up, walking to the old writing desk that stood in the corner of the room. He opened a secret drawer that Sophia had never noticed and removed a stack of yellowed papers. "These are all the letters Rebecca wrote to me. During our relationship, I kept them all these years as a personal punishment." He extended the papers to Sophia. In them you will find references to the pregnancy, to her fears, to the plans she made for the future of you two. Sophia took the letters with trembling hands. Her mother's handwriting, seen for the first time, was like a punch to the stomach. "There's more," continued Richard, removing a folder from the drawer. "I hired detectives over the years to track information about you two. I never had the courage to make contact, but I always wanted to know if you were well. And were we?" Richard lowered his eyes. "Rebecca never married again. She spent her life looking for you, going from orphanage to orphanage. She died without ever having managed to find you." Sophia doubled over as if she had taken a physical blow. "She looked for me for 20 years. She had a folder with newspaper clippings about missing children, photos of all the girls who might be you." Richard knelt again before her. "Sophia, your mother never stopped loving you, never gave up on you." Sophia's crying intensified, but now it was different. It was no longer pure anger, but a complex mixture of pain, relief, and longing for something she never had. "Why did you never look for me? If you knew where I was, why did you never try to find me?" "Because I thought it would be selfishness on my part, that I had no right to appear in your life after everything I had caused." Richard hesitated. "And because I was afraid of what you would think of me." "And now?" "Now I know that you have the right to hate me. You have the right to expel me from this house, to never want to see me again. But I also know that I can no longer live without you knowing the whole truth." Sophia wiped away her tears and stared at him with an intensity that made him feel completely exposed. "Richard, I need time. I need to read these letters, process all this. I need to discover who I really am before deciding who I want to be." "How much time do you need?" "I don't know. Maybe weeks. Maybe months." She rose from the armchair, the letters pressed against her chest. "But I'm going to stay, not for you, not for this house, but for me. Because I finally found the pieces of the puzzle of my life, and I'm going to put it together completely. And us. Is there any possible us in the future?" Sophia stopped at the door of the room and turned slowly. "Ask me again when I finish. Getting to know my mother through these letters, when I manage to forgive the past, when I discover if it's possible to build love on so much pain." Sophia spent 3 weeks reading and rereading Rebecca's letters. She did this alone in her room, during the silent afternoons, when Richard locked himself in his office pretending to work but actually watching through the window the rain that fell incessantly over Oakwood Hills. The atmosphere of the mansion had changed again, becoming dense with expectation and resurrected memories. The letters revealed much more than Sophia expected to find. Rebecca wasn't just a secretary who had become involved with her married boss. She was a cultured, sensitive woman who wrote about literature, philosophy, and her dreams for the future. In the first letters prior to the discovery of the pregnancy, she spoke of her lonely life, of books she read in the early hours, of how she felt invisible in a world that seemed made for other people. "Richard sees me," she had written in a letter dated March 2001. "Not like other men, who look through me or only at parts of my body. He sees me whole, listens to my opinions, seems genuinely interested in my thoughts. It's dangerous to feel seen by someone who can't completely belong to me." Sophia closed her eyes, imagining her young mother in love, writing those words in a solitude she knew well. There was so much of Sophia herself in those pages, the same feeling of invisibility, the same hunger for genuine connection, the same tendency to fall in love with impossible situations. The letters that talked about the pregnancy were the most painful to read. Rebecca alternated between euphoria and terror, between the joy of carrying a life and the fear of the uncertain future. "I feel her move inside me every night," she had written in July 2001. "It's as if she wants to console me, tell me everything will be all right. I talk to her, sing lullabies, read poetry aloud. I know she listens to me. I know she already loves me as I already love her more than I ever thought possible to love anyone." Sophia instinctively touched her belly, trying to imagine what it would be like to feel so loved even before being born. All her childhood fantasies about parents who abandoned her because they didn't want her dissolved in the face of this tangible proof of unconditional love. There were also letters written after the birth, during Sophia's first months of life. Rebecca described each smile, each gesture, each small progress of her daughter with a detailing that bordered on loving obsession. Sophia smiled at me today for the first time. It wasn't just gas, as Mrs. Jenkins suggested. It was a real, conscious smile, as if she were thanking me for bringing her into the world. I cried for hours afterward. How is it possible that something so small contains so much love? Mrs. Jenkins. The name appeared frequently in the letters. Sophia discovered that her mother considered the housekeeper a friend, someone she trusted, to take care of the baby during her working hours. Mrs. Jenkins' betrayal, when she allowed them to take Sophia away, must have been devastating for Rebecca. But it was in one of the last letters that Sophia found the passage that would change everything. I'm writing this hidden in the hospital bathroom. They discovered where we are. Elizabeth appeared yesterday with 2 men, said she's going to take Sophia far away from me, called me a homewrecker, a woman without character. I tried to explain that Richard isn't the father, but she won't listen. She's blind with pain and vengeance. I managed to hide this letter and some photos of Sophia in a music box that I plan to leave in the house, hoping that one day she'll find them. If something happens to me, if I can't prevent them from taking my daughter, at least she'll know she was loved, that she was always loved. Sophia stopped reading, her heart beating uncontrollably. The music box. Rebecca had deliberately hidden the letter, hoping that one day she would find it. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a desperate plan of a mother who sensed she would lose her daughter. She ran to the room and took the golden box. She examined it more carefully, looking for secret compartments. At the base, she found a small, disguised lever. When she pressed it, a false bottom opened, revealing 3 small photographs and a final sealed letter. The photographs showed baby Sophia in Rebecca's arms, mother and daughter smiling, playing, sharing moments of pure happiness that Sophia never knew had existed. In one of the photos, Rebecca looked at the camera while Sophia slept in her arms, and in her eyes was a love so intense it was almost painful to contemplate. The sealed letter was addressed, "For my Sophia, when you are a woman." With trembling hands, Sophia broke the seal and unfolded the paper. The handwriting was more hurried, less careful, as if it had been written in haste. "My love, if you're reading this, it means you managed to return home. Yes, home, because that mansion was your first home, where you took your first steps, spoke your first words. Richard is not your biological father, but he was the one who first made you laugh, who carried you around the house on Sunday afternoons while I prepared dinner. Elizabeth may have destroyed our family, but she cannot erase the love we built during your first months of life. You belong to that place, Sophia, more than any of them. And if one day you decide to forgive the mistakes of the past, know that love also lived in that house. The love between us, the affection Richard felt for you, even the sick love Elizabeth felt for him. Distorted love, misdirected love, but love nonetheless. Don't let pain be the only inheritance you take. From this story, you deserve to be happy, my angel. You've always deserved to be happy." Sophia slid to the floor, hugging the letter to her chest. For the first time since she had discovered the truth about her origins, she didn't feel only pain. She also felt the comforting presence of maternal love, the certainty that she had been wanted, protected, intensely loved during the months she had lived in that house. She rose slowly and walked to the bedroom window. Down below she saw Richard in the garden, standing in front of a rose bush that seemed dead. He was wet from the rain, but didn't seem to care. There was something lost in his posture, as if he too was processing ghosts from the past. Sophia descended the stairs unhurriedly. When she reached the garden, Richard turned, and she saw that he too had been crying. "Elizabeth's roses," he said, indicating the dry bushes. "I thought about pulling them out after she died, but never had the courage. Now, I don't know if I should try to save them or let them die once and for all." Sophia approached the rosebush and examined the branches. "They're not dead," she said, gently touching a small bud that was beginning to emerge from the base. "Just sleeping. Sometimes plants pretend to be dead to survive very harsh winters." Richard looked at her with an expression that mixed hope and fear. "Sophia, I read all the letters," she interrupted softly. "All of them, including the last one, which my mother hid for me to find when I was ready." "And what did it say?" Sophia extended her hand, touching his wet face. "That love also lived in this house, that I shouldn't let pain be my only inheritance. And do you believe that?" Sophia remained silent for a long moment, observing the green bud that insisted on growing despite all the abandonment. "I'm learning to believe. I'm learning that it's possible to build something new without completely erasing the past." "Sophia," said Richard, covering her hand with his, "may I touch your skin now? Not to redeem myself from the past, but because I don't want to live anymore without feeling that I'm alive." She didn't answer with words. She just slowly removed the glove she always wore in the garden, revealing the scar on her wrist that she had gotten in a suicide attempt at 18, when the pain of abandonment had almost completely destroyed her. "This scar," she said, showing it to him, "marks the day I almost gave up looking for love in the world. But now I understand that love sometimes comes disguised as pain, and that some stories only make sense when we reach the end." 6 months later, the Oakwood Hills mansion had completely transformed. The windows remained open all day, allowing natural light to bathe the rooms that for years had lived in semi-darkness. The heavy curtains had been replaced with light fabrics that danced in the breeze. Elizabeth's portraits were no longer covered. Sophia had reorganized them in a gallery in the upper corridor, treating them not as ghosts to be hidden, but as part of the house's history that deserved to be recognized and respected. Sophia and Richard didn't marry immediately. They decided that first they needed to learn to live together without the ghosts of the past, to build a relationship based on who they were in the present, not on who they had been forced to be by circumstances. She continued living in the mansion, but now occupied the main bedroom next to his, in an intimacy that grew slowly, carefully, like the roses in the garden that she had managed to revive. The healing process wasn't simple. There were nights when Sophia woke up screaming, pursued by nightmares about babies being torn from their mothers. There were afternoons when Richard shut himself in the office, tormented by the guilt he knew he would carry forever. But they learned that shared pain becomes more bearable, that true love doesn't eliminate the wounds of the past, but offers a safe place to heal them. Mrs. Jenkins remained in the house for 2 more months after the revelation, until deciding it was time to retire. On the morning of her departure, she sought out Sophia in the garden, where the young woman was watering the rose bushes that now flourished exuberantly. "You succeeded," said the ex-housekeeper, with a mixture of admiration and relief in her voice. "Succeeded at what?" asked Sophia without stopping watering the flowers. "Breaking the curse of this house, transforming pain into life." Sophia smiled, but it was a melancholic smile. "I didn't break any curse, Mrs. Jenkins. I just learned that some stories need to be retold to make sense." Mrs. Jenkins approached and for the first time in decades spontaneously hugged someone. "Your mother would be proud of the woman you've become." "I know. I feel her here sometimes, especially when I play the piano." Yes, Sophia had begun to play Elizabeth's piano, not the melancholic pieces that the deceased wife used to perform, but new melodies, her own compositions that were born from the fusion between her pain and her hope. Richard spent hours listening to her play, fascinated by how she managed to transform suffering into beauty. Dr. Mitchell visited them regularly, bringing more details about Rebecca and about Walter Freeman, Sophia's biological father. She discovered that she had inherited from him her sharp intelligence and the ability to read people. But from Rebecca came her artistic sensitivity and her inner strength. It was a powerful combination that helped her navigate the complexities of her new life. On a December afternoon when summer covered the hills with golden light, Sophia found Richard in the library organizing the books Rebecca used to read. He had created a special section for them, a kind of silent memorial for the woman whose life he had helped to destroy. "It's time," said Sophia, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Time for what?" "For us to visit my mother's grave." Richard closed the book he was holding and turned to look at her. They had talked about this possibility for months, but Sophia had never felt emotionally ready. "Are you sure?" "I am. And I want you to come with me." The cemetery was in a small town in the interior of the state, where Rebecca had been buried in a simple grave, without flowers, without regular visitors. Sophia knelt before the headstone and placed a bouquet of white roses, the same ones, that now flourished in the mansion's garden. "Mom, I found my way home," she whispered, tears silently running down. "And I also found the complete story of our family, the story of pain, but also the story of love that you left me in the letters." Richard stood a few meters behind, respecting the private moment between mother and daughter. When Sophia stood up and turned to him, her eyes shone with a peace he hadn't seen before. "Thank you," she said, extending her hand to him. "For what?" "For having truly loved my mother, even though it was impossible, for having kept the letters all these years, for having allowed me to find my place in the world." They walked hand in hand to the car, and during the entire trip back to Oakwood Hills, they talked about the future. Sophia wanted to transform part of the mansion into a cultural center where orphaned youth could learn music and literature. Richard completely supported the project and offered full financing. "It will be like a circle closing," said Sophia, as they watched the mansion appear at the top of the hill. "Children without family finding a temporary home in the same place where I lost mine." That night after dinner, they sat at the piano in the main room. Sophia played the melody that Rebecca loved most, no longer the melancholic Chopin nocturne, but a cheerful waltz that her mother had mentioned in one of the letters as "the music I play when I want to remember that life can be beautiful." When the music ended, Richard stood up and walked to the old writing desk. From a secret drawer that Sophia didn't know, he removed a small blue velvet box. "Sophia," he said, kneeling before the piano bench, "I know I can't erase the past. I know our story began with pain and terrible mistakes, but I want the future to be different. I want to build with you something that honors Rebecca's memory and that is worthy of the love she felt for you." Inside, the box was a simple, delicate ring with a small emerald surrounded by tiny diamonds. "It's not a new ring," continued Richard. "It belonged to my grandmother, a woman who believed that true love always finds a way to overcome adversities. I thought she would approve of you wearing it." Sophia extended her left hand, the same one that carried the scar on her wrist, mark of a time when she doubted she deserved to be loved. When Richard slid the ring on her finger, she felt as if she were sealing not just a commitment to him, but a promise to herself to never again doubt her own worth. "Yes," she said, kissing him softly, "but with one condition." "Which?" "We want 3 children, and we'll raise them knowing from the first day that they are unconditionally loved." Richard laughed, a sound that echoed off the walls of the mansion like music. It was the first time in 11 years that the house had witnessed a genuine laugh of happiness. 3 children, he repeated. "Sounds perfect." They married the following spring in a small ceremony in the mansion's garden, surrounded by flowering rose bushes. Sophia wore the wedding dress that had belonged to Richard's grandmother, but carried in her bouquet a single white rose in honor of Rebecca. During the ceremony, when the judge asked if they accepted each other as husband and wife, Sophia looked at Elizabeth's portrait that could be seen through the living room window. For a moment she imagined seeing approval in those painted eyes, as if the deceased wife finally understood that some stories need to end in redemption. "I do," said Sophia, her voice echoing clear and strong through the flowering garden. "I do," replied Richard, kissing her while the guests applauded and the roses swayed gently in the afternoon breeze. The mansion, which for decades had been a mausoleum of mourning and regret, finally transformed into a home. Not because the ghosts of the past had been exorcised, but because two people had learned that it's possible to dance with the shadows without being consumed by them. And every night, when Sophia played the piano before sleeping, the music echoed. They threw the corridors like a prayer of gratitude for second chances,